Good evening, friends. Myself, Dr. Nidhi Darbari, on My Education Treasure, and today I am going to explain about the objective writing skill in micro teaching. According to I.K. Davis, in teaching, planning is the work a teacher does to establish learning objectives. Planning is important in every walk of life. The success of a piece of work is to ensure if the work is properly planned. Without planning, we shall be aimlessly loitering about, applying means without aiming at the achievement of ends. Just as planning is important in our daily life, planning is of unique importance in the teaching learning process. For a successful and effective teaching, planning is the first and most important step. The teacher should know beforehand what to teach and how to teach. Planning leads to systematic work and helps to avoid wastage. Well stated, clear objectives are fundamental to all professional teaching and measures taken to hold teachers accountable for what their students learn. There is a lot of confusion regarding the use of the term like aims, goals, outcomes, objectives, etc. Educators use these terms synonymously. NCRT has defined objectives as that objective is a point or end in view of something towards which action is directed and a planned change sought through the activity what we set out to do. According to this definition, teaching objectives includes three things: direction, which means that objectives determine the direction of action which is designed for achieving an ultimate goal. They keep the person in action on the track all the time. Planned change, that means it helps for a planned change. When action is done in a definite direction, desired change in the behavior of student is brought about. And activity, which means that it provides the basis for organizing activities. Action is a must in order to achieve any objective. It is a reality that the objectives have such a power due to which all the teaching activities of the students are managed towards a definite direction. The aimless activity lacks management. As a result of this, desirable changes in the students do not take place. The formulation of precise objectives gives the teacher greater motivation to acquire the means of attaining those objectives and to evaluate them. The difference between aims in education and objectives in education. The aims can be defined as the general statement or sentence that identify the target of a program, whereas objective is more specific target set in order to achieve the goal on a larger front. Objective is as specific as it can be. Aims are compared to objective can be considered as vague. Objectives are precise and narrow. They originate from aims. Aims do not contain a time frame within which they need to be achieved. Objective is always accompanied by a time frame within which they need to be achieved. Aim is described as the ultimate goal which an individual or the institution strives to achieve, whereas the objective is something a person or institution seeks to achieve by continuously chasing it. Aims reflect its long-term outcomes, whereas objectives indicate the short-term targets. So far as the aim is concerned, it is related to the institution's mission and purpose. They are the end views of the possible achievement, whereas the objectives are concerned with the achievements of the institution. The aims answer the question what is to be achieved, while objectives answer the question how it is to be achieved. Aims lack measurability, they are difficult to measure, but objectives are measurable in nature. Aims being broad and wide hence have little significance, but objectives being specific become meaningful. Aims are abstract, but objectives are concrete. Aims are the directions given to the entire educational system within and without the classroom, whereas objectives are confined to the classroom and the school or an educational institution. Aims are intangible, whereas objectives are tangible. The aims of education cannot be changed from subject to subject, whereas the objectives may be changed from subject to subject. Objectives of teaching social science will differ from the objectives of natural sciences. The achievement of the aims of education is beyond the scope of school program. There are other agencies of education also, but the objectives of instructions can be achieved. And lastly, the aims might be stated in terms of some mixture of the meeting of local, regional, or national need, but the objectives are more focused statements which describe what the learner will be able to do as a result of teaching and learning. Types of instructional objectives. An objective represents the desired change in the student who undergoes education. It is what the student is expected to do after studying the course. The objectives are of two types: non-behavioral objectives or general objectives, and behavioral objectives or specific objectives. Now we will discuss about the non-behavioral objectives or the general objectives. These are very general statements which describe in implicit terms the overall aim of the total educational process. They are summaries of the learning outcomes of teaching learning process and express the generalized behavior expected to the student. General objectives are used by curriculum planners to indicate very broadly what the program intends to achieve. General objectives are not explicit. It is stated in broad terms to encompass a class or domain of student performance. It is the job of the teacher to convert these general educational objectives into specific instructional objectives which will be more meaningful to him and help him to plan the teaching learning strategies. The learning objectives are educational objectives. The behavioral objectives or specific objectives. Montaigne and Bilt have defined behavioral objectives as a behavioral objective is the goal of for or a desired outcome of learning which is expressed in terms of observable behavior or performance of the learner. If the objectives are stated in specific term, then they are called specific instructional objectives. They contain behavioral verb, that is, they contain action verb. It means that the objectives should reflect the terminal behavior of the student in specific terms. Therefore, such objectives are called as behavioral objectives. Expected learning outcomes, behavioral objectives, and specific learning instructional objectives are same. Before planning his lesson, a teacher should specify such objectives which should be achieved at the end of the lesson. Specific instructional objectives must be stated in specific behavioral terms so that they can be observed and measured. Rules for stating the specific objectives by Groundland are: number 1, instructional objectives should be stated in terms of students' performance and not teachers' performance. Rule number 2, the objectives should specify what the student will be able to do at the end of the lesson and not what the teacher had intended to do. And the rule number 3, the mere description of subject matter should be avoided. An objective should specify both kind of behavior expected and the subject or context to which that behavior applies. Rule number 4, use action verbs. Use verbs that refer to any observable activity displayed by a student. State in terms of learning outcomes instead of the learning process. Describe in detail the final outcome of learning, end product, and not the process of learning itself. And the last one is the rule number 5, an objective should not consist of more than one learning outcome. The difference between non-behavioral objectives, general objectives, and behavioral objectives or specific objectives. The non-behavioral objective or general objective describe the expected learning behavior of the student in broad terms. Example, to apply, understand, analyze, perform, or to use. Whereas the behavioral objectives or specific objectives are useful in identifying those students' behavior which correspond to a given set of content. The non-behavioral objectives or general objectives describe students' terminal attitude, example, to appreciate, to value, or to volunteer, whereas the behavioral objective or specific objective provide criteria for the selection of learning activities. The non-behavioral objectives or general objectives form a starting point for writing the specific objectives. General objective can be broken down readily into many specific objectives, but behavioral objectives or specific objective provide accurate activities to evaluate the progress of the students. The behavioral objective or specific objectives are helpful in organizing content in a proper sequence and selecting instructional method. Behavioral objectives or specific objectives are useful in performance assessment. The first step of the non-behavioral objective is to try to begin each general objective with a verb. Example, appreciate, know, understand, etc. You can preface your list of general objectives with statements such as, on the completion of the study, the student will be able to. But the step 1 of the behavioral objective is consider each general objective separately, for which the teacher have to derive the specific objectives. Step 2 of the non-behavioral objective is to state each objective as students' behavior or students' performance, not teacher's intention or performance. Whereas the second step of the behavioral objective is list below the general objective the specific objective, which breaks down the general objective into detailed learning outcomes. Each specific objective describes the terminal performance, the final behavior which students are to demonstrate when they have achieved the objective. Step 3 of non-behavioral objective is to state each objective as learning outcome or a learning product rather than in terms of the teaching process. Step 3 of the behavioral objective is to begin each specific objective with a verb specifies student performance or behavior, that is an action which is usually measurable and certainly observable. Step 4 of the non-behavioral objective is to state each objective so that it broadly identifies expected or desired terminal behavior. Step 4 of the behavioral objective is to make sure that each specific objective is relevant to the general objective from which it is derived. Step 5 of the non-behavioral objective is to state each objective at a level of general learning outcomes, later to be broken down into specific students' behavior. Step 5 refines the original general objective if necessary, having defined the specific objectives. Step 6 of the non-behavioral objective is to state as many objectives as are necessary to cover all the content or units prescribed in the curriculum of the course. Step 6 of the behavioral objective is to check specific objectives to ensure that duplication has been avoided. And the seventh step of the behavioral objective is to sequence the specific objectives. If you found the video to be informative and interesting, please give a like to the video to motivate me, share it with others and subscribe it so that whenever I upload a new video, you will get a notification. The criteria for writing the general instructional objective should contain a non-behavioral term, that is a non-action verb. The verb acquires, understands and develops skill are non-action verbs. They are in the form of inner development or passive aspect of the mental activity which we cannot measure directly. The criteria for writing the specific instructional objective should contain an action verb, that is the behavioral term. Example, defining and explaining are related to behavior. The specific instructional objectives should be written in the form of a completed activity or a behavioral outcome which is observable and measurable. The criteria for writing the general instructional objective should also mention the subject matter area or content. The statement of objectives will help the teacher to evaluate the student level. Unless the subject matter area is known to the teacher, he will not be able to organize learning activities and hence realize the objectives. The formulation of these objectives help the teacher to have a comprehensive view of the related ideas included in the study unit. The criteria for writing the specific instructional objective is that the statement or specification should contain two parts. They are the modification part, that is the student's expected behavior, and secondly the content part by which the student behavior is to be changed. The criteria for writing should be that it should be written in the form of the achievement of every single student and not in the form of the achievement of a group of students or class. The criteria for writing the specific instructional objectives should be in the form of the student's achievement and not in the form of teacher's interaction. The criteria for writing the general instructional objective should contain only one ability to be developed or achieved or modified, whereas the criteria for writing the specific instructional objective that it should contain only one behavior to be developed, achieved or modified. Thank you very much for patiently watching the video and don't forget to subscribe.